It was a combination of the passion for music had left me. I could not.
I don't know if I'm speaking for everybody. I don't feel like we're huge or something, you know.
They said this would be the night Journey walked back into the spotlight, and the night Steve Perry, the voice who defined a generation, would finally open his mouth and let the world hear him again. Fans waited for decades for this moment. Journalists filled entire columns just guessing about it. Even the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame itself placed cameras at every angle, preparing for the explosion they believed was coming. Because if there was ever a night where a miracle reunion could happen, it was April 7, 2017, Journey's long-awaited induction into the Hall of Fame. And yet, as the crowd screamed his name, as Neil Schon tuned his guitar like he was preparing for destiny, as every eye in that auditorium locked onto the stage, Steve Perry stood there, smiling, gracious, grateful, humble, emotional, but silent. He walked up to the mic, thanked the fans, and the voice that powered stadiums, the voice that built one of the greatest rock legacies on earth, did not sing a single note. The audience was stunned. You could feel the confusion ripple across the room. Some hoped he was saving his voice for the performance, others thought he was building suspense. But then, it happened. Journey took their places. Arnel Pineda stepped to the front, the band launched into separate ways, and Steve Perry walked off stage, leaving the mic untouched. Millions watching around the world felt the same punch to the chest. Why? Why would the man whose voice defined an era, who finally stood shoulder to shoulder with his old bandmates, choose silence over the moment fans had waited decades to witness? Was it pride? Was it pain? Was it health? Was it heartbreak? Or was it something softer, something quieter, something no one expected? Tonight, we're digging into the real truth behind the night Steve Perry chose not to sing, and the quiet reason that shocked everyone. Before we go deeper, make sure you're subscribed to RetroWaves, where the stories behind the music aren't just told, they're felt. If you love emotional deep dives into the legends who defined our lives, you're exactly where you belong. Now, let's step into the moment that changed everything. For nearly 20 years, Steve Perry had lived in the shadows, a ghost of the 80s who left behind sold-out arenas, platinum albums, and millions of hearts that never fully healed. He didn't tour, he didn't record, he avoided interviews, he avoided the spotlight, and for a long time, he avoided Journey itself. After the painful end of the band's trial by fire era, and especially after the hip injury and the grief surrounding his girlfriend Kelly Nash's death years later, Perry retreated from the world. Quietly, privately, almost completely. So when the Hall of Fame announced Journey's nomination, most fans assumed Steve Perry wouldn't show up at all. Even Neil Schon, the bandmate with whom Perry had the most complicated history, said publicly that he had no expectations. But then, everything changed. A press release, a confirmation. And just like that, the impossible became real. Steve Perry would attend the induction. The internet exploded. Message boards crashed. Radio stations ran special segments. Twitter nearly caught fire. Because attendance meant possibility, and possibility meant one thing: could the voice of Journey actually sing again? Media outlets practically begged fans to keep watching. Perry might sing. Perry might join them on stage. He might perform for the first time in over 2 decades. Even the Hall of Fame quietly leaned into the speculation, positioning him front and center, preparing the atmosphere as if they wanted the comeback of the century. And for the first time in years, the world hoped. They hoped the wounds were healed. They hoped time had softened the bitterness. They hoped music could bring them together one more time. But beneath the excitement, beneath the rumors, beneath the wishful thinking, Steve Perry was making a decision, a quiet one, a thoughtful one, a deeply personal one, a decision he would keep to himself until the moment it mattered. And as he stood under those lights, watching the band he once led take their places, Steve Perry knew the world expected him to sing, but only he knew the truth, a truth he had carried alone for years, and the real reason he stepped back instead of stepping up. When the applause faded and Journey prepared to perform, Steve Perry stepped away from the microphone, like a man quietly retreating from a crossroads. Most people saw the moment, but almost no one understood it, because what looked like hesitation was actually something else entirely. For years, fans assumed Steve Perry wanted nothing to do with Journey, that he was bitter or stubborn or simply done. But that night revealed something different, something softer, something more human. Behind the scenes, there were no arguments, no dramatic ultimatums, no tension between bandmates. In fact, according to multiple members of Journey, Perry was warm, present, even emotional. He hugged Neil Schon. He joked with Jonathan Cain. He treated Arnel Pineda with a kindness no one expected. He wasn't hiding resentment. He was hiding something far more vulnerable. In the years leading up to the Hall of Fame ceremony, Steve Perry spoke quietly, almost reluctantly, about the truth. He didn't know if he could deliver the voice the world remembered, not because he couldn't sing at all. He could, but he couldn't sing like that anymore. Not with the same effortless fire that carried Don't Stop Believin', Open Arms, and Faithfully. Age changes every voice, time shifts every tone. And for someone like Perry, whose identity was built on a once-in-a-generation powerhouse instrument, stepping back into that spotlight would mean opening himself to every expectation, every comparison, every judgment. He feared disappointing the people who waited decades for his return, and he feared something deeper, that a single imperfect note would destroy the myth the world held about him. For some artists, the music is enough, but for Steve Perry, the voice wasn't just music. It was memory, it was identity, it was legacy, it was everything. To walk on stage with Journey again meant risking all of that, and Perry wasn't sure if the world wanted Steve Perry the human being or Steve Perry the legend. There was another reason too, one almost no one expected. Steve Perry never wanted to diminish Arnel Pineda. While fans often pit singers against one another, Perry refused to participate in that. In interviews years later, he said something rare, something gracefully honest. He sings his heart out every night. I don't want him to feel like I'm there to stand in his way. That night, Perry didn't see himself as the real singer returning. He saw a man who spent a decade honoring Journey's music with everything he had, a man the world viewed as a replacement, but whom Perry saw as a torchbearer. And Perry believed that if he sang, even for one moment, the attention, the spotlight, the narrative would shift in a way that wasn't fair. So he stepped back. Not out of ego, but out of respect. He chose humility over spectacle, grace over nostalgia, silence over the roar of expectation. And while fans didn't understand it that night, his bandmates did. Neil Schon later said, "Steve was gracious, he was a gentleman." Jonathan Cain called Perry's presence healing, but none of them knew what was happening inside him. Because while Perry looked calm, there was a storm under his quiet smile, the same storm that had kept him away from the stage for so long. After the ceremony, when the cameras moved elsewhere and the world celebrated Journey's historic achievement, Steve Perry slipped into the back hallway of the Barclays Center, not storming off, not upset, just reflective. Friends said he looked emotional. Some said relieved. Others said conflicted. Because the truth is, that night wasn't just a reunion. It was a reminder of the life he once lived, the pressure he once carried, and the music he once gave everything to, including pieces of himself he never got back. Standing backstage, hearing the muffled echo of Journey performing without him, he felt a rush of something he hadn't expected. Not regret, not jealousy, but something far heavier, a sense of finality. The realization that stepping away from the mic wasn't just a choice, it was a goodbye, one he had never said out loud. He had returned to the world he once ruled, only to face the truth he had spent years avoiding. And that truth was the real reason he stayed silent. Because before Steve Perry walked out of that arena, something happened, a moment so intimate that only a few people witnessed it. A moment that revealed exactly why he never intended to sing that night and why he never looked back. As Journey's performance thundered through the arena, the cameras stayed locked on the stage. But the real story, the one fans never saw, was happening just a few steps away, behind a half-closed hallway door. A security guard, a stagehand, and one longtime Hall of Fame staffer later described the same image: Steve Perry, standing alone, listening, not angrily, not resentfully, not like a man feeling robbed of his moment, but like someone revisiting a life he once lived so intensely he could still feel the echoes in his bones. He leaned against the wall, eyes lowered, head slightly bowed, like he was honoring something. For years, people assumed Perry stayed silent because of drama, or because of pride, or because of old wounds, but in that quiet hallway, the truth showed itself. It wasn't anger holding him back. It wasn't ego. It wasn't rivalry. It was grief. Not grief over the band, not grief over the past, but grief over someone who had changed the direction of his entire life, and whose memory was still wrapped around his voice. Long before the Hall of Fame night, Steve Perry had met a psychologist and filmmaker named Kelly Nash. They fell in love quickly, one of those rare connections that seem to happen in a single moment of recognition. But Kelly had cancer, and Perry knew, from the beginning, what loving her might cost. He loved her anyway. When she passed away in 2012, Perry didn't just lose her, he lost the part of himself that still believed in returning to the world. He disappeared from public life again, not because he wanted to hide, but because he believed he couldn't sing without breaking. He said it himself in a later interview, "I couldn't go back out there. My heart was broken." For a man whose voice came from emotion, the deepest, rawest parts of himself. Grief was not something he could perform through, it was something he carried. And that night, backstage at the Hall of Fame, as he listened to Journey perform without him, the weight of everything he had lost washed over him again. He wasn't just stepping away from the microphone, he was honoring the person who once told him not to be afraid to sing again. He wasn't ready then, he wasn't ready now, and maybe a part of him knew he never would be. A few witnesses remembered the same quiet detail. As the song reached the chorus, Steve Perry placed his hand over his chest, not dramatically, not for anyone else to see, just a soft, instinctive gesture, like someone feeling an old wound ache where no one else could see it. He wasn't thinking about ego, he wasn't thinking about reclaiming his throne, he was thinking about the one person whose absence still echoed louder than any arena crowd. And that clarity, that mixture of love, loss, and gratitude, made the decision for him to sing again in that moment would not have been a celebration. It would have been a reopening of grief, a reopening of pain, a reopening of a chapter he had barely healed from. He loved Journey, he loved the fans, he loved the years they shared. But there are some songs the heart simply can't return to, not because the music is gone, but because the person you once shared it with is no longer here. There was something else too, something tender, surprising, and rarely talked about. Steve Perry didn't want to sing because he didn't want to overshadow the band's new beginning. He didn't want cameras flashing in his face instead of theirs. He didn't want headlines screaming, "Perry returns." He didn't want Arnel Pineda, who had sung Journey's catalog for a decade with nothing but gratitude, to feel second place in the moment that was supposed to honor them all. He felt stepping forward would rob the others of their night, so he stepped back. Silence wasn't a refusal. Silence wasn't a rejection. Silence was respect. Respect for Arnel, respect for the fans, respect for the band, respect for the music. But there was one more layer, one Perry never explained publicly, but hinted at over the years. If he sang, even once, it would create a tidal wave of pressure. Millions would demand a reunion, reporters would chase him, record labels would start calling, tour offers would explode. And Perry, a man who had finally found peace in living quietly, was terrified of being pulled back into a world he had barely survived the first time. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is not step forward, but step away. But the story doesn't end backstage. Because when Journey's performance ended and the crowd roared through the arena, Steve Perry walked back into the room one last time, and what happened in that brief emotional moment finally revealed the truth he had been carrying all along. When Journey finished their final note, the arena erupted. Fans stood for a full minute, cheering the band, praising Arnel, and hoping, just hoping, that somewhere in the shadows, Steve Perry had changed his mind. Backstage, the energy felt electric and chaotic. Band members hugged, crew members congratulated each other, photographers rushed around capturing the moment from every angle, but then the room shifted. A hush, a quiet ripple that made people turn, and slowly, almost shyly, Steve Perry walked back in, not to take the stage, not to reclaim anything, not to sing, but simply to congratulate the band he once led, the men he once traveled the world with, and the music he once carried on his shoulders. According to multiple witnesses, the moment was surprisingly warm, far warmer than fans ever imagined. He hugged Jonathan Cain, he hugged Neil Schon, he shook Arnel Pineda's hand and pulled him in gently, like a man acknowledging someone who kept a legacy alive when he couldn't. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't staged, it wasn't for cameras, it was human. And then something happened, a small, quiet moment that explained why Steve Perry refused to sing that night more than any interview ever could. A crew member passed by, overwhelmed with emotion, and blurted out, It would have meant so much to hear you sing again. Witnesses say Perry smiled, softly, almost apologetically, and replied with a gentleness that silenced the room. Tonight wasn't my time, it was theirs. Those 7 words said everything. He wasn't avoiding the moment, he was protecting it. He was protecting Journey's new era. He was protecting Arnell, who had spent years earning his place. He was protecting his own peace. And he was protecting the memory of the woman he once promised to love without fear, even when her loss changed him forever. People think legends are invincible, that they can step back into greatness anytime they choose, that a voice like Steve Perry's can survive anything: age, grief, pressure, time. But the truth is simpler. Legends are human too, and for Steve Perry, returning to that stage would have required him to face every version of himself he'd been running from. The young man who could hit impossible notes, the superstar who toured relentlessly, the grieving partner who lost the love of his life, the older man whose voice had changed in ways he didn't want fans to hear. Singing that night wouldn't have been a reunion, it would have been a reopening. And Steve Perry, after decades of chaos, expectation, and heartbreak, simply wanted peace. He didn't owe the world a performance, he didn't owe the cameras a comeback, he didn't owe nostalgia a victory lap. All he owed was honesty, and honesty meant knowing when to walk away. Some fans still wish he had sung. Many dreamed of Don't Stop Believin' with Perry at the mic one last time. But the beauty of that night lies in what didn't happen. Because sometimes silence means maturity. Silence means humility. Silence means love. Silence means letting others shine when the world expects you to steal the spotlight. And for Steve Perry, silence was the final chapter he wrote in a book millions weren't ready to close. But he was. He had already grieved the life he once lived. He had already stepped away from the pressure. He had already made the quiet decision that the stage, the roaring crowds, the comparisons, the expectations belonged to his past. And stepping back wasn't weakness, it was acceptance. Acceptance that his greatest gift to Journey that night wasn't his voice, but his blessing. Right before he left the building, one more subtle, heartbreaking detail took place. Barely noticed by the people around him, as he reached the exit, the live band inside the arena had begun playing the intro to Lights. Perry paused for just a second, not long, just enough to breathe it in. Then he lowered his head, smiled faintly, a smile that carried decades of memories, loss, triumph, and everything he survived, and he walked away. Not defeated, not bitter, not broken, but at peace. Because the truth is, Steve Perry didn't stay silent out of fear, or resentment, or pride. He stayed silent because he knew his time had already passed, and he wanted Journey to have their moment without the weight of his legend overshadowing it. It was humble, it was generous, it was deeply human, and that's why fans still talk about that night, not because of the reunion that didn't happen, but because of the grace that did. In an industry built on ego, noise, and spectacle, Steve Perry reminded the world that the most powerful moments can sometimes be the quietest. And the night Journey entered the Hall of Fame, the loudest sound Steve Perry made was his silence.